Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here.
It's great to have another professor of the American College. We have had, I don't know, we've had Jamie Hopkins, David Littell, Wade Pfau. We just keep going down the list here of professor after professor. Now we have Steve Parrish here, and I'm a big fan. I've been through your courses. I've got my CLU, my RICP, my CHFC. I didn't do my CFP training through you guys, but I did that as well. I'm a big believer in education and what you're doing. So thank you for all that you're putting out there in the world.
Well, that's our purpose. So when we hear you getting all those initials and actually remembering what they are, I'm impressed.
Well, you are one that you got your retirement income certified professional designation at the age of 64, I understand.
That's correct. In the beginning of my youth, yes, 64, because I don't know. I just decided I wanted to stay fresh, and this is the hot topic these days.
Well, I heard that you refuse to retire. Is that true?
Well, I refuse to retire, but I guess a distinction that I always like to draw, in fact, for people that are thinking about it, is there is a difference between personal retirement and financial retirement. Because, yeah, I refuse to retire. I'm working hard since the pandemic. I'm probably working more than I ever have. But I have to admit, Casey, from a financial standpoint, I still had to decide about Medicare, still had to decide about Social Security. So that's kind of financial retirement.
What's the personal retirement? So you said personal and financial retirement. These are two very different things. Can you go a little deeper there for us?
Sure. On the personal side, I'm not retired. And when I left the company I was with before I went to the American College, my wife sometimes would say, oh, my husband's retired. And I would just get mad because I'm not retired and I don't intend to be. But we were dealing with Medicare and Social Security distinctions. It's kind of like when I deal with business owners, you don't go to a business owner and say, when are you going to retire? Because you've said the equivalent of, hey, when are you going to become insignificant?
Yeah.
I want to be thought of as retired, but obviously I had to deal with the financial side of it.
Yeah. So you're in a position that you could retire if you want, as I understand. So financially, you have retired and you're working for a different reason at this point?
Yes, I'm doing it because, first, it's personally fulfilling. Second, it gets me, I was going to say it gets me out of the house, but that kind of went away with the pandemic. But I mean, in other words, it keeps things live and busy. And I frankly believe a lot in the topic we're talking about. So I feel like I still have something to give. So I don't know when I'd personally retire. But again, you still have to deal with all these things that you deal with.
So do you have a plan for that retirement in the future?
No. The nice thing is the only thing I'd have to plan really is what I do with my time, because I have taken care of and keep monitoring with my tax advisor, my financial plan. So retirement would really be just the day you hang up the spurs.
Yeah. Right. And I think about this in a business sense. I've been told a million times, hey, you need an exit strategy. You need an exit strategy. You need an exit strategy from your business. If you're going to start a business, you start with the end in mind. And I recently had this conversation with the largest independent insurance brokerage owner in the country, if not the world. And I said, do I really need an exit strategy? Because I don't ever plan on retiring. Do I really need an exit strategy? He said, we don't have an exit strategy because we don't ever plan on quitting either. I feel like you don't have an exit strategy either. You don't have a point in time when you said, well, at 75, I'm going to retire. What are your thoughts on that? Do you have, in your opinion, in your mind, do you have an exit strategy from your position at the college and others?
I don't at this point. And part of that is I'm just not at an age yet where I truly have to have one. I suppose there is a point where you might either have cognitive issues or being feeble or whatever. But I do want to draw a distinction, because my concern these days is, particularly with the pandemic, is people go, okay, well, I'm not making as much money as I thought I was going to, so I'm never going to retire. But hidden behind that comment is, and therefore I don't have to deal with some of these issues. Mm-hmm. So yes, you need an exit plan in terms of your health insurance. when Medicare, what are you going to choose for a supplement, those kind of things. You have to think about, am I going to delay Social Security? Are you going to take it now? What am I going to do with my, maybe coming from a company, and what am I going to do with my qualified plan? That all still has to be dealt with at the exit level. I just mean at the emotional level, if you're happy with what you do, I'm not sure you need a plan
Yes.
other than if you see it coming. And then you say, okay, what am I going to take up golf? By the way, I don't.
Yeah, well, and I guess the next question would be, so you've addressed a lot of these issues, maybe tax planning, healthcare planning, insurance planning. What about retirement income planning? Because many times I'll sit down with someone that says, well, I don't really need an income plan because I don't really plan on retiring. But as you said just a moment ago, there is, I don't remember the exact percentage. You probably have this at the top of your head, but it's something like 60, 70% of individuals plan on to continue to work, but they can't.
Mhm.
Right? You may be forced into retirement for a million different reasons. And so you want to have a backup plan. You want to have a retirement income strategy on the sidelines. Do you have that for yourself?
Yeah, that part, we really, when I say we, I think it has to be, I'm married for 42 years. And so, it's got to be something we do together. But we do have that kind of a plan because you never know what might happen for all the reasons you just mentioned. Once I worked with my brother a little bit on his plan, and as an example, just to give you one, is he was a retired executive, but a large part of his retirement strategy involved getting a supplemental executive retirement plan, a non-qualified deferred comp from his company. But he really did two different plans because those things can, if the company goes out of business, you stop getting your payments. And so he really had two plans. And I hate to say this, but guess what happened? The company did go out of business. So he and his wife were not caught off guard. They had thought through cash flow planning and all that in case he lost his deferred comp, which indeed he did. So you still have to have your plans for cash flow management. Again, when you're going to take Social Security, how are you going to cover your health, those kind of issues.
Do you think that you would be enjoying your work as much as or just life in general right now if you didn't have that backup plan in place? I feel like I've seen this so many times. People say, yeah, I want to retire. Then we put together a retirement strategy. We've got this comprehensive plan. They go, yeah, I really like what I'm doing. I'm going to keep working now that I know I don't have to.
Yeah, and the reason, this is my way of looking at it, is because you don't have to look at it so much as a retirement income plan. In my case, this will probably be one of my highest paying years, but you still have to deal with retirement risk. So the plan you're doing for somebody like myself who's having an encore career, that's what they sometimes call it.
Mm-hmm.
I went from business to academe, is fine. The income's in pretty good shape, but you still have to deal with risk, long-term care, health, those kind of things. So you can't escape those issues. You really have to, if you can check off the boxes of the risks that could happen, cognitive decline, long-term care, a major health crisis, a family crisis, a loved one, that kind of thing. If you can check those off that you've done something with insurance or annuities or long-term care, then you can kind of say, okay, the income side we're good on for now.
Mm-hmm.
But you still have to deal with retirement risk. It's not just income, it is risk as well.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned a second, you second act, third act, you have encore career, right? I think this is one of the ways that retirement planning is changing today. The retirement landscape is changing today, that individuals are putting together, implementing a retirement strategy, and yet they're not actually retired. It's just allowing them to live more free in what they really want to spend their time doing in retirement. What other ways do you see the retirement landscape evolving today?
Well, Casey, I think one of the big ones, and it's happening very quickly, and so I think we have to recognize it, and it's because of the pandemic, is that some people are almost being forced into that second career. I just recently talked to a gentleman who, I'll say it this way. He was very early 60s, has his job as an editor at a book company, and his job's not in jeopardy, but his wife is a middle school teacher. And she's 60, and suddenly her school district said, you have to teach in class live. And she looked and said, I'm not willing to jeopardize my health. This is kind of nuts. And so frankly said, I didn't intend to retire this early, but I need to. And so they're suddenly in the panic of they're in pretty good shape financially, but you now have the issue like they had their coverage for health insurance through her employer. Well, if she retires, what do you do about health insurance?
Mm-hmm.
They were talking about when I hit 62, should I take my Social Security early, even though their income's not bad? What I'm getting at is mine's a situation where I've chosen to take it as long as I can. We're seeing a lot of early retirements that are by choice, like a teacher or another essential individual who just says, I'm just not sure I want to go to work, where they're still probably going to be an okay situation, but it really surprised them and advanced the period of time in which they have to start really getting down and thinking about their retirement plan. And that's definitely a trend that we didn't see before, but it's been pushed forward because of what's going on out there.
So the trend, and maybe it seems like this is a trend that's been out there, at least maybe is a risk that's been out there, right? Forced retirement's always been a risk. I guess it becomes more real when we have a recession or some type of economic downturn, then it becomes real. So if we just took this and backtracked this to the financial crisis, and didn't we see that same trend at that time?
We did the same kind of thing, and something you see that somebody of my age can relate to is some people I know who are doing fine, upper middle class, whatever. Some people are maybe in their young 60s and saying, I don't want to see somebody in my department lose their job. I'd rather give up my job than have that person suffer. They got to put food on their table. And I can think of several cases, both during the Great Recession and currently, where people have said, I love what I'm doing, but I don't have to do this. I'd rather give it up. So you really do have that kind of thing when you start getting in your late 50s or 60s and saying there's more to life than just income. I want to give back some way.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a good transition into, I think, my favorite article that you ever wrote. So if you didn't know, every single Friday we send out a weekend reading for retirees, just email from myself, 4 articles, trending topics, some little commentary. And I've included so many of your articles. I think we've probably got one of your articles going into that email every week for like a half a dozen weeks because they're that good. I mean, I really enjoy your content, especially the ones around retirement income planning. And one that we most recently actually did a spotlight on the podcast was titled, How Should Your Retirement Asset Drawdown Strategy Fit Your Personal Story? And I really loved this article, really connected with this article. And I guess you say it should fit your personal story. And some are going to go, well, I just want a prescription. I just want the best strategy. I want the one that, the academics say this is the best strategy. And I think there's some of that, you can find some of that. Easy question. Is there an academically best strategy?
Easy answer, no, there isn't, because humans are human. And I know which article you're talking about, so I might just give you the short version of what I was getting at.
Sure.
And by the way, I don't think you said it, but those articles are available. Just look in Forbes, Forbes.com, and type my name. But what I was getting at is, what if you had 3 women who were just turning 65 soon, and they're in a book club together, and they just coincidentally are all going to get $30,000 from Social Security and all have $1 million built up in their 401k. Well, if the answer was yes, there's one academic solution, then they would all have the same retirement drawdown strategy. But the difference is one of them was very risk averse and didn't want to deal with investments and was kind of scared of them, frankly. One was a risk taker and said, oh, you bet. So with one, you might use a flooring strategy where you use things like annuities so that she knows she's going to get the retirement she wants, whether she lives to 80 or 105. The other one, you would probably keep her money in market, and you would use, I know you've heard of the 4% or 4.5% rule, and she'd draw that down. But isn't that interesting? They're both 65. They're both have the same amount in their 401k, and they're going to get the same Social Security, but you use radically different strategies because of their attitudes, how they feel about their money and about their life.
Do you think anybody doesn't have an attitude like that? Because I go to the engineer. I've got these engineers I've worked with. They say, I want the best strategy. I've ran all kinds of numbers and spreadsheets. I want the best strategy out there. And for my particular goals, let's say that they want to maximize their income. They're not concerned with what's left over. They just keep it very simple. Max income, nothing left over. I just want to get the best strategy there is. And then there's still some bias in there, right? Even though they've analyzed all the scenarios and they say, well, I want the best strategy, you present the best strategy and they go, yeah, but I want to be a little bit riskier, or, you know what, I just don't like those kind of products.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's just reality. And when I first started in the business, there wasn't anything called behavioral finance. Now everybody talks about it, but we have to realize that people are going to be people. They have built-in biases, and it's not a pejorative. It's not a bad thing. It's just the way we are. And so that engineer might be one engineer might be risk averse and another one might be a risk taker. And that's part of how an advisor can help them, is just sort through their own mind, because I think we're the worst judge of our own character. So you need that person outside to say, I get it, but how would you feel about a 10% loss? And if the person explodes, and maybe they're risk averse. It's just the nature of the human psyche, and we should celebrate it.
Right. There's nothing wrong with it, right? You can have those biases, but you need to know you have them. Right. I think that's the risk, that you don't know that this is a bias that you picked up from reading an article in the newspaper somewhere, or the neighbor told you, or the doctor told you that you went and got your physical from. Right. You need to recognize that those are not necessarily reality. You're telling yourself a story.
Right.
Right.
I think of a situation years ago when I used to work a lot on big, large corporate situations, and I was in a board room with the CFO that was the CPA, and I am not picking on accountants, but I said we were using life insurance in this particular situation, and I still remember him saying, I don't like life insurance. And I said, pardon? He said, I don't like life insurance. And I finally said, well, I'll tell you what, let's call the thing I'm talking about Fred. Now, let's discuss what Fred could do in your corporate situation. I have to admit, he kind of leaned back and he said, okay, touche, let's talk about it. And then we worked our way through the whole process. But that was, at least he was admitting his bias, but he didn't realize the bias could get in the way of his corporate decision. And so we had a good laugh about it and we moved on.
Well, you wrote an article for Forbes, another one called Retirement Tools That Are Misunderstood Yet Useful. And one of my questions was, what do you do to shift someone's prejudice? And it sounds like you just call it Fred.
I do. I suppose today, probably the biggest one you hear that's really changing quickly is the whole area of annuities. And I can say that because at the American College, you've had several professors who've talked about it, and we do the numbers and we look and go, in the right situation, it makes sense. But for various reasons, and I'm not even sure what they all are, annuities kind of got a bad name and they're kind of clumped in with others. And so that would be one of the misunderstood ones, where you have to say, all right, let's call it whatever you want to call it. But if you need a tax advantage lifetime income, there are only so many products that can do that. Let's talk about what it is. So yeah, there are a lot of those kind of things out there. And I'm sure I have my own prejudices. In fact, I will say, Casey, that I had a prejudice against reverse mortgages until I got to know professors at the American College, and they showed me some of the numbers and went, oh, okay. I read some just general articles. I really didn't do my research until they showed it to me. And in the right case, it can fit.
Isn't it cool when you find one of your own biases that you had that you didn't really realize what was there? And reverse mortgages, that was the same for me when I read, and for years I said, don't even look at them, right? You shouldn't, that's bad stuff. And, only scammers do these things. And then I read Wade's book that was about, 300 pages on reverse mortgages. And I go, maybe there is a use, right? And I'd say the same thing about variable annuities.
Yeah.
For years, I just said, these things, they're just expensive. I've never seen a good one. It's inefficient. And then my dad he was a financial advisor for about 40 years. And he said, keep your mind open. There's a reason that there's so many people utilizing these tools, because they might have a fit for someone, and maybe there is a good one out there. Just keep looking. And I kind of came around and said, especially with, I think it was, I think Wade also wrote a little bit about variable annuities, saying, well, if you have someone that wants upside potential, but they want a guaranteed income, this might be the only way to get them invested. What's the alternative? The alternative is doing nothing. So something is even better than nothing, even if it's inefficient.
Right. Well, and what we tend to do is we take a personal experience we've run into, or somebody that's close to us runs into, and if they had a bad variable annuity or a bad advisor, you then take that and just assume that applies to everybody. So it's kind of like Plato was a Greek. Plato was brilliant, therefore all Greeks are brilliant. You just come up with these logical traps that you get yourself into. And I think that's what's happened. There's certainly annuities that have absolutely bombed. They usually have to do more with the advisor than the annuity. But because of that, you just assume that applies to everybody. And frankly, I think the reverse mortgage area is almost a disservice to itself through some of its commercials. It's late
Right.
night. Sleep, you see a commercial and you go, well, that must be a real ripoff. But
Well, how do you sift through that stuff? You have all this stuff being thrown at you from advisors to, let's just maybe focus on news networks, right? You've got one talking head saying annuities are good, one saying annuities are bad, one saying term only, invest the rest, another one saying, well, you should focus on cash value life insurance. And if you Google any product, could be mutual fund, ETFs, any insurance product, whatever it is, there's going to be an article out there saying how terrible it is, an article out there saying how great it is. How do you sift through to find the truth?
well, now, of course, at the academic level, we have the advantage of being paid for taking the time to do that. But I mean, for the general consumer, and I don't claim to be an expert on social media, but a lot of that, and people have gotten smarter about that, is to check where the source is. In other words, you read an article and where really is that coming from? Are they making these big, massive conclusions that say reverse mortgages are a ripoff or reverse mortgages are always good? Then you worry about it. I think if it's that process of sifting through it. And I have to say one other thing is, and it depends on who you're talking to and what their situation is. But in many cases, that's what the advisor can help on. And the advisor can come from many different areas, but I just mean, I think it used to be that advisors, they were the keeper of the information, but then they invented the internet. So we all have access to all the information. It's more, you may need somebody to help you interpret the information. So the answer to your question, in some cases, depending on where you are with your situation and who you trust and all that, is somewhat using the advisor to help you sift through the various information that's out there.
Yeah. Well, I know when I read an article, before I put it into our weekend reading series, I Google the author. I want to know where they're coming from, right? And quite often if I find an article that it's basically, I mean, we had one recently, it's either cash or the market. Those are your only two options. And I looked at, well, it's a fee only advisor, right? They don't have any other solutions but cash or the market. And then I'll find another article that's pro life insurance and, everything else is bad. And I look up the advisor and it's an insurance only salesperson, right? And so I want some kind of unbiased source, preferably not an advisor at all, preferably someone like you that's approaching this from an academic perspective. But I think we got a little off track. I really wanted to stay on this article that you talked about, your personal story, because I think there's a lot in there that can offer a lot of benefit to our audience. And one is just, balancing goals. And that's a lot of what this article is all about. You've got Abigail, Camilla, Beth, you've got these three individuals and, each one of them has, a slightly different goal. How do we balance our goal from, say, simplicity or easy to understand to legacy to income, because there's a trade-off for all of these different things. And I think that's where we get down the rabbit hole of complexity, is we're trying to maximize our legacy, but we want as much income as we can possibly get. We only like the market. We don't want any guarantees, right? How do we balance all the different goals that we have? And maybe you want to relate this to your wife and you. Maybe you two had different goals. We see that often with spouses.
Well, and I'll start with the personal and then kind of go back to where I was going with that article. Is we looked and said, because we do well, and I don't mean rich, but I mean we do well, maybe we can peel off some money that we otherwise could invest and all that, but we could take the risk off the table. So one of the areas that we've had this ongoing debate on is long-term care. We bought it, I will say like in the late 50s. And as you well know, the cost of long-term care has frankly skyrocketed. And this was from a very quality company, but they had increases that I never would have thought it would happen. And we know that's just a reality in what's going on in the marketplace. I've wanted to maintain that. My wife has said, but gee, we're paying a lot. And part of it is our case. We just worked it through. But what we finally agreed is, even though that's taking money out of our cash flow, it's that peace of mind of feeling that we don't want to be a burden to our adult children. And so for us, that worked well. For another couple, they might say maybe they're not as in good financial situations, so maybe they have to just take on that risk and get rid of the insurance to improve their cash flow. Those are the kind of things you have to do, is sort through and say, I used to call it my butterfly index. If a recommendation I come up with for a client gives them butterflies, a lot of them, or keeps them awake at night, then what have you accomplished? I mean, if they're nervous, and who cares if they get 50 basis points more on return on it? So a lot of it is sorting through those personal feelings. So like in that article, again, I was distinguishing between the person whose personal experience was such that she hadn't been around investments, was nervous about it, wanted to make sure she was okay. And then if there's any money left over for a legacy for the kids, great. You had the other who said, look, I am a disciplined person. I can take risk. Just help me, advisor, sort through, I've got this big pot of money. How much can I take as an income such that all things being equal, even in bad markets, I'll probably have enough money to take me out to 90. And then if it happens to be I die before that, or the markets do better than I expect, a legacy for my kids, that's great. Those are two different stories, and yet they're in the same financial situation. So it's really sorting through, how do you feel about risk? How important is it that you get a particular income? And then, what legacy would you like to leave if possible?
Right. So we've got those three things. You need to balance your risk tolerance, and when you say income, the flexibility with the income from year to year. You're not talking about the income level that you need, but your propensity to take risks, not just with the investment, the portfolio and the fluctuations in it, the upside, the downside, but also the upside and the downside of your income as well. Is that what I hear you say?
That's correct, and particularly for pre-retirees, because many of them have not really, as adults, experienced the high inflation that we had in the late 70s and early 80s. And so they're not factoring in the inflation as being one of those keep myself flexible type of things. So that's an example of the kind of thing they have to keep in mind, is how much does my income have to change to deal with current situations.
Mm-hmm. So we have some risk trade-offs, income, legacy, and so we're trying to balance these three things. In your opinion, those are the three core things that you're trying to balance. So is there always a trade-off from one to the next?
It's not so much a trade-off as factoring all of those in. So I guess a good way of putting it is, where's the important one? And so if they say at the end of the day, legacy is a big issue, then you probably have to figure out a way to capitalize or to monetize that legacy so you know that will be taken care of. So, I mean, to put it in practical terms, If leaving something for the grandkids is a really big issue, then maybe you have to peel some money off and prepay for it in the form of life insurance, because that way, it's going to come, the amount is identified because it's a life insurance policy. If instead it's no, I really do want to leave something for the kids, but I need to know I'm going to have at least $70,000 a year, then you might have to, like I said in the article with that one person, you might use that money to buy an immediate annuity, because come hell or high water, you're going to get your immediate annuity and Social Security. You still love your kids. They'll still probably get a legacy, but you kind of move that secondary to your income. So part of it's just prioritizing which one of those is the most important.
Well, I think what you said in the article was really helpful, I think, hopefully for more people than just myself, but that many people get into this process. It becomes very overwhelming and confusing very quickly, but it's all about the story. You talked about figuring out your story, the story you most attach to before you engage with a financial planner, or on the front end of engaging with a financial planner, rather than getting right into the academically best strategies, right? You were walking through multiple strategies and now you're overwhelmed because there's just so many different things going in. So we've got this risk, income, legacy. So is it about figuring out your story before you engage with an advisor? What's the best way that we avoid overwhelm and confusion, which is such a common thing with those engaging an advisor?
I think, well, as you said, part of it is you can't use the advisor as the excuse for putting off important decisions. So in other words, saying, well, I'll just have an attorney write me a will and then I have to think about it. You still have to figure out in the will what it is you want. I mean, so the same thing on the financial side is you kind of have to think, when might we retire? How do we feel about risk? How engaged do we want to be or not want to be? Some people are saying, I want to golf. And so let's just put that money somewhere where I don't have to think about it. Those are not questions that the advisor can solve for you. They're questions maybe the advisor can ask you, but you have to go through that process. I just see the example I'm seeing right now is in the tax area. People rarely go and say, I need help on a financial plan. What so often happens is, I need a will, or I paid more in taxes last year than I wanted to, or I lost on my investments. So they get an advisor and focus in on that issue. And that's kind of a way of almost avoiding asking yourself the tough questions. When do I want to retire? How much do I need for income? Those kind of things.
Isn't that so true? As you say that, I remember all the conversations I've had as people come in and visit with our team. It's usually the one-offs. I feel like I'm paying too much in fees, or I lost money last year. I overpaid in taxes last year. Yeah, it's never the big questions. How long am I going to live? How much do I want to leave behind to my heirs? What's going to be my charitable giving strategy? It's never about all of these things. It always starts with one point. So, and you're saying that leads to a dangerous place?
Well, yes, because you focus on the minuscule and ignore the big. So, and again, this sounds critical. I don't mean it to be, but I think one of the things, that's why we're having these kind of discussions, is people have to be reminded, oh yeah, I don't like it that I paid more taxes, but what's the bigger issue? The bigger issue is, will I have enough money when I retire? I mean, it's often the question behind the question that you're really trying to get at. So an example, if this helps, is right now, I'm an attorney and I've been an estate planner for years. The estate planning attorneys are absolutely swamped. They're having trouble taking people in. Well, the issue is because people are recognizing their own mortality because of COVID-19. That's not a bad thing. And I'm glad they're taking care of their estate planning, but that should lead to the further question of, okay, maybe it's time to sit down and really think through this. What if I lost my job? What if I decided to early retire? How am I in finances? Do I really understand when Medicare kicks in? Do I understand this whole thing about Social Security? So it's okay to focus on the one-off, as you called it, but that has to lead to the bigger conversation.
And you gave us some examples of different questions that we should be asking ourselves before meeting with a financial advisor? Is there one question in particular that you think everyone needs to ask? It's the one big question in your mind. No, I'm putting you on the spot there too. So just give me the first one that comes to mind if that's too difficult.
Well, I think the big issue right now is health insurance or health coverage. And I say that only because people don't really understand how our system works. And our system is kind of, it's challenged right now. So people don't always know where they can get their health insurance. If they're going to early retire, they may not understand. Here's the one I run into all the time is people don't realize you can't get your health insurance, your Medicare, you cannot get your Medicare through your spouse. And so in the example I gave you of the people in their young 60s and the woman who was a teacher wanted to retire, what they didn't really understand is they had to do something about securing health coverage until 65 with Medicare. So I just mean that to me is the one I'm hearing right now because people don't understand it. And we're in a situation where we don't know where the Affordable Care Act will go. Without getting all technical, there's this thing COBRA, which is essentially the insurance that you can maintain after you've left or lost your job. The rules changed on that because of COVID-19. So that's the hot issue. That's the burning one right now, I think, in retirement planning.
This all sounds so confusing. Yeah. I mean, you've brought up estate planning, you've brought up wills, you've brought up long-term care, Social Security, Medicare, investment strategies, annuities, life insurance. And you've brought up all these different things. And, I wrote about a lot of these things in my book, Job Optional. And I don't know about you, but I really struggle reading reviews sometimes. I want them to all be good. Yeah. And there was one in particular that popped out at me and he basically said, hey, this is a great book, a lot of great information in here. However, definitely overcomplicating the retirement income strategy. And what I did in the books, I went through all the different income strategies, right? I went through the 4% rule, systematic withdrawal approach, went through, a flooring strategy, a bucket strategy. I went through all the different strategies because, and I guess, does it need to be complex? Does retirement plan, in your opinion, is he right? He said, just throw it in an index fund, draw out 4% a year, everything's going to be just fine. And there's a lot of that out there. Can it be really simple? Do we need to make it complex? Is there a middle ground?
I think that really goes back to the individual. So some people, as in that article that you mentioned, I think her name was Abigail, where she just simply said, look, I don't want to worry about investments. I know the amount I need, or you could work with an advisor to help figure it out. And so let's just keep this simple because I'll sleep better at night. That will work. But as you know, there's going to be some trade-offs. In other words, she might miss some market opportunities. She might pay a little more in tax than she might otherwise have to. But that's fine because she said that's a concern of mine. With other people, maybe it's a little more work and maybe it's a little more reading, a little more time with the advisor, whatever it takes, but there can be more complex answers. But the trade-off is that you might get a better return for it. You might pay less tax. You really have to decide what's important to me. So truly you can make it simple, but just realize you're paying something for that. It might be more tax, it might be less return. If that's what you need to really be able to sleep at night, great. But the one thing you can't do is ignore it all because then it's going to be a mess because you either didn't take advantage of the government program that was there or you paid way, way more in taxes than you needed to, or maybe even a penalty because you didn't take out a required minimum distribution and get hit with a big tax penalty. So you can't just ignore it, but you can make it easy if you need
Sure.
to.
So it kind of sounded like you said, hey, we can keep it really simple, but there's going to be a trade-off, right? There's a downside to keeping things overly simple, or we can make it more complex, and that's going to lead to a more efficient strategy. But as we get more down that road of complexity, people start asking, well, I heard I'm supposed to only invest in what I know and what I understand. And I'm not sure I completely understand this strategy. It's getting more and more complex. How much do we need to know about the retirement strategy we're putting in place? Some say, I don't want to know anything. You just do it, right? I mean, what is the correct balance of knowledge there?
I think the challenge is if you think about our parents or grandparents, they had a defined benefit plan, Social Security, and that kind of took care of a lot of it. So they really didn't need to know a lot. Plus, there wasn't much out there. I mean, you had a passbook savings. That was about it. Mutual funds were just barely known. The unfortunate situation, I will concede, is nowadays, one way or another, you do have to engage because I've been using the term DIY-DB. What's that mean? Do it yourself, defined benefit. The fact is, and if I'm the purveyor of bad news, I'm sorry if I'm doing it, but part of the job now is the consumer really does have to engage because typically what they're going to have is when they retire, they're going to have a pot of money. They're going to have to decide what to do with it. Now, again, as we said before, you can take some simple steps like an annuity or whatever, but there may be a trade-off. But I don't think in the United States right now, we're in a situation where you can say, I'm not going to worry about it because it's just not that situation. Most people don't have defined benefit plans. You're not covered for health insurance automatically until Medicare kicks in. So it doesn't have to be super complex, but I think you have to check off a few of those boxes because no one else is going to do it for you.
Right. It's starting to get more complex. And I do find, the happiest clients, the most confident clients are the ones that really understand their plan. They've really taken the time to spend time with us, spend time in the reading we've provided them to really understand the strategy. That's what's given them, more confidence. I want to talk a little bit about the three strategies that you discuss in this article. You've got Abigail. So you've got, a guaranteed income strategy. She's getting a guaranteed income of $82,000 a year. And then we've got Camilla. She's a little bit more risk averse than Beth, but and so Camilla used a bucket strategy, right? And Beth used a systematic withdrawal approach. So you had a 4.5% withdrawal, you had a bucket strategy, you had an annuity strategy. So you had these three different strategies. I wanted to talk a little bit about Camilla and Beth. So you said Camilla is more risk averse than Beth. However, so that's why Camilla ended up with this bucket strategy, right? So she's got income from, say, a fixed income portfolio, cash, very conservative investments last 10 years. She's got a second bucket she's not going to touch for 10 years. She's got a third that she's not going to touch for 20 years or more. And then you've got the other individual that's got the same investment mix. They both end up with like a 60-40, investment mix, but one's just going to take 4%, 4.5% out a year. The other one has this bucket approach where the fixed income is in leg 1, the equities are in leg 3, a little bit in leg 2. I don't really understand why we would ever use the systematic withdrawal approach, if it's the same investment mix. Why wouldn't you just go with the bucket approach over the single portfolio if you're going to end up with the same investment mix? I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, first I would draw a distinction. I'm not sure that the one woman is any more risk averse than the other. It's just that she is concerned that her human capital is gone. She's retired. So, should somebody in their 60s be in the market? Isn't the market risky? So it's almost a question. And so the bucket approaches that. It tells a story because it says, wait a minute, what we'll do is keep you liquid with a third of it so that you can, live in your go-go years of retirement. We'll put some of it away for your next bucket 10 years from now and when you start slowing down. And then look, there's inflation and things we don't know and you want to leave a legacy for your kids. Let's carve some of that off. As you point out, it's the same portfolio mix. In some ways, it's just that Beth, who was the risk taker, kind of cuts through it and says, I'll just take 4.5. But to answer your question, and this is my observation of just having worked with advisors for many years, is most people are not Beth. Most people are not in a situation that said, yeah, we'll just put it in a nice portfolio and cut off 4.5% or 4% or whatever. And so really, at the end of the day, the bucket strategy, I totally agree with you, is that it's the story that helps you understand your own career as a retiree, because you realize you're going to have go years, slow go years, no go years, and those buckets kind of play to each one of those. So I agree with you, but the nice thing is you're getting to the same solution, but you're getting at it a different way depending on their personality.
Is it the same solution though? Because if we're taking 4.5% out of a 60-40 portfolio, quite often I see that done. It's just kind of shaving a little bit off of all those different positions in the portfolio. So you're not strategically, selling where you should be selling necessarily.
Actually, yeah, I do agree with that, because the trouble with the systematic withdrawal is that's more of a academic solution, in the sense that all things being equal, looking at past history, you can make it to age 90 and it won't collapse. But the fact is, what if you have that money in something like 10-year bonds, and it's going to take a while before you could recover that. And if you surrender it early, you're going to take a market hit. The bucket approach really segments your assets and doesn't cause you the practical problems that just severing off 4.5% would. Let's be, and I know you're aware of this, but in reality, no one just takes 4.5% of a mutual fund. That'd be crazy, because you'd be taking all kinds of risk and all kinds of hits you don't need to. What you would do is put on some guardrails. You would make sure some of that money is still liquid. You might put some money in deferred annuities. In reality, the 4.5% is more of a concept than it is reality.
Yeah, but people don't know that. That's the danger, right? You read an article and it says I can take 4.5% out a year. I got a 90% chance this works out. Sounds good to me. Yeah, and not diving further into the research that really illustrates the dangers of doing something like that. The two individuals, Camilla, Beth, they had started with a lower income. So I think it was like 74,000 that they started with. Whereas Abigail, she had this flooring strategy. So she had a guaranteed income of 82,000 a year. So she took a portion of that portfolio, set it aside, about 800,000 she set aside to guarantee all the income she needed the rest of her life. It's level, right? And then setting aside 200,000 in a balanced portfolio, you said, she shouldn't necessarily need inflation protection. And yet these other two are thinking they're going to need an increasing income the rest of their life. So does one need at age 65 inflation protection or not?
Actually, in my mind, all three of them do get inflation protection, but they get at it a different way.
Yeah.
Probably knew I was going with that, is with the woman who said, let's just take 800,000 and give me that $82,000 income, I believe it was, mixing Social Security. And remember, Social Security has a cost of living feature in it. So she is getting some inflation protection, at least on part of her income. The rest of it, I said a balanced portfolio because I didn't want to complicate it, but I would, if I were advising her, I'd make sure that's fairly heavy in equities, because in general, equities tend to work well with long-term with inflation. So one, that might give her that inflation buffer for at least 200,000 of her wealth. And also it might help as a legacy for the kids. With the other two, you already were building in inflation because you had a 60-40 split. So maybe it's a little different emphasis, but I think all three of them do have some inflation protection. And of course, Social Security was part of that as well, because that does have cost of living feature, we hope.
So what are your thoughts on, I'm sure you've seen David Blanchett's work on the spending patterns of retirees. And Wade included much of this in his most recent book as well, talking about retiree spending patterns and how the average retiree will not be impacted by inflation and will not need an increasing income for their lifetime. That depends on where their spending pattern starts, but the average retiree will have a level income. And I am saying from experience, we've got clients we've been working with for over 20 years. They're spending less today than they did 20 years ago. However, the average retirement planner is throwing together a plan and showing this 3% inflation rate. Your income needs, those clients we're working with, going that route, they should be spending twice as much today as they did 20 years ago, but it's not actually happening. I don't know what your thoughts are on all that research.
I would throw in one distinction in what Drs. Fow and Blanchett have, and both of them I think would agree, is the research tells us that some of the services that people get when they retire actually are hit at inflation levels or even higher, because it might be the person retires and now needs the young person to help them with their web or to mow their lawn or whatever. So there are some expenses that actually go up a little bit and can actually be a little more than inflation. But what the research, especially Dr. Blanchett gets at, is the fact is very true, is because you're not, well, I was going to use the example of dressing up in suits, but no one does that anymore. But because you're not commuting and going to, I was going to use restaurants. Boy, you have to come up with an example, some new examples now during this crisis. But you simply, as a retiree, and I know that personally, you don't have some of the expenses that a young family would be, some of the entertainment and all that. So yes, I don't think that you have as much inflation pressure on retirees as you would have on pre-retirees. The one qualifier I would say, which is the big unknown, of course, is health expenses. Under our current system, really even that can be contained if you do the right thing with Medicare and Part D and Medicare Sup. But yes, in general, as you get older, the reality is, unless you're going to give big gifts to your grandkids, and remember, you love your kids, but you really love your grandkids, you're not going to experience perhaps as much inflation impact as a young family would.
Yeah. And then if you've got someone that's spending $150,000 a year, going on elaborate vacations, multiple cars, large home, they're probably going to spend even less as they age than someone that's, spending $35,000 a year, and they're really just, using that for their basic needs. But I still like that you've set some funds aside. I mean, I really like Abigail's strategy because I think there's a portfolio that should be set aside specifically for not just inflation protection, but flexibility. We don't know the impact of inflation. We can look at research all day that shows that, hey, for someone that spends $50,000, $60,000 a year, you shouldn't be impacted by inflation. Don't worry about it. However, if we have a really bad period of time, it's kind of like a Monte Carlo simulation, right? We've got a 10-year period where the market doesn't grow and we have a big hit during that period of time, then, well, we need to have a backup plan. If we have a 10-year period where we see 15% inflation, we need to have something set aside that can increase our income during that period of time. And we want to find the right tools for that. You said largely equities. You didn't say anything about gold, but that seems to be something that usually comes to someone's mind. They say, well, why don't I just put all that money in gold?
Well, and of course, right now, that's the interesting thing going on, because you really have the tangible gold. There's these different ways of getting your piece of the, the big brick. And then you have the futures, where you're kind of betting on where it would go. Commodities in general are an interesting topic right now, because anytime you have the huge volatility we have, suddenly commodities become a possibility, and a pretty good one. You just have to remember is, if everybody thinks that commodity is the hot thing, that's going to tend to push prices up. And certainly gold has had some upward pressure, but maybe justifiably so. I think that is an area that traditionally has been ignored and probably should be considered if you can do it in a balanced way. And I don't mean to change the subject, but I'll tell you the one that I think is just not hit the consumer's attention, but I think is a powerful tool, is, and they've got different names. You hear QLAC and DIAs and all that, but the basic idea, because it really didn't exist until the last few years, of going to a financial company, like typically an insurance company, and giving them a pot of money now that starts paying an income way in the future. And you go, well, wait a minute, that's just a deferred annuity. I've heard of those, and you either like them or don't. It's different. This is one that says, the money is gone. You don't get it. You can't commute it. You can't do anything. But it's kind of like Social Security, is when you hit the age you tell us you want to hit, it's going to provide a income that you can't outlive. So I just want to bring that one up because academic research tells us that can make all kinds of sense, but people go, why on earth would I just take money and make it go away? And the answer is because it's a DIY DB. You do it yourself to find benefit, but one that maybe doesn't kick in until you're 75.
Yeah.
So I just had to throw that in because in some ways, that doesn't sound like gold, does it? But in some ways it has the same effect. It's looking way out in the future and saying, this is one way we can make sure you got some income.
Yeah. I've now I'll say in total transparency, that's one of those tools I've had some bias towards. I said, QLACs, they're just awful, and they haven't been good. The rates have been just awful, and it's hard for me to justify, but we keep revisiting it. It's like, well, maybe they'll come out with one. And as this progresses, it's such a new thing. Maybe we'll, get some good opportunity in the future, but I hadn't really thought about it as inflation protection. It was just longevity protection. I don't think I've heard anybody put it in that perspective, saying, hey, what if you experience inflation? Rather than setting it aside in an equity portfolio and taking risk, why don't we set it aside? And if inflation kicks in, we can kick it on for some increased guaranteed income down the road.
Right.
An interesting approach. I like the way you're thinking about that. So we talked about QLACs. So you've talked about life insurance, long-term care. You have these three gals. You've got one that's got a flooring strategy, a bucket strategy, a systematic withdrawal strategy. Can all advisors offer that level of personalization?
Well, a simple answer is the answer is no, because they either haven't gotten the education level they need, or without going into details, I know you're aware of it, some of them only can represent a product or a company or that kind of thing. But are they capable of it? Certainly, the information is out there. The education is out there. The infrastructure in the United States for offering this product, these kinds of products are out there. It just depends on the level of commitment and knowledge of the individual advisor.
Now, if I want that level of personalization, I want somebody to bring all the tools to the table, not just one or two. I want all the tools to be brought to the table so that they can really customize it at that level. How do I find the best fit advisor for that scenario?
One of the things that at least can be an initial indicator is what level of commitment they've had through designations. So at the American College, we have the Retirement Income Certified Professional. We have, I think most people know the term CFP. So those indicate at least the person made a commitment to their own career. It doesn't suddenly make them a perfect person or anything else, but it's an indicator of that. A second, obviously, is referrals. I mean, other people that have used that, I would be a little careful with that, because what's good for Henry isn't necessarily good for Sally. But that's a way of looking at it. And then your own research on it, where and frankly, you can do broker check to see if there's any complaints with FINRA. FINRA is the government organization that monitors all this, checking to make sure they're doing well. You do your homework on that just like you would on, I just recently bought a boat. Well, guess what? I looked at it a lot of different ways, and I saw, I asked for people's referrals. I checked it on the web. It's the same kind of process.
Well, Steve, I only got through half of my notes here today. I've got some really good stuff. I'd love to dig deeper into some of your other articles on Social Security and estate planning, business owner issues. So hopefully we get that at some point in the future. But as we run out of time here, do you have time for one more question before we wrap things up?
I do, certainly.
Steve, what does purpose and meaning mean to you?
Purpose and meaning, in some ways, are the same thing, except for I would say purpose is looking a little bit outside of yourself and saying, there's a reason I'm here. I'm just not here to breathe oxygen and eat food and
make money.
It's to me a little more internal to say, okay, and how do I feel about it? I've got a lot of gray matter in here. How does it make me feel? There is nothing, well, let's take charitable giving. That has a purpose. That helps people, especially in these times, and it's very external looking. Meaning, we all know that you get an endorphin rush when you give. And that's not bad, but it makes me feel better. That's how I would distinguish the two.
And where does Steve find purpose?
Where I find purpose, and I hope it doesn't sound trite, but so much in family. I told you how long I've been married and I have adult kids and all that. I think at the end of the day, that's part of it, is doing the right thing for my family. But, and this goes to the I'll never retire theory, and maybe it's a little more the purpose thing, is I think none of us are as smart as all of us. And so to the extent I can continue to offer ideas, it absolutely thrills me to have a young person like yourself say, gee, I read your article on those 3 women, because that I felt good when I wrote that, because I thought maybe someone might actually read that article and get something from it.
Well, I think several thousand people read that article. If I do remember, I was just one of many, but now I'm pushing it out into the world because, Steve, you have so much to offer. Thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge. I hope we get to do this again.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Casey.